So if it's okay with you all, what I'd like to do is kind of jump in to the problem that we're trying to tackle, then a little bit of the results, a little bit about how the program works, but interspersed in that, I'd love to take questions if you have them. Otherwise, I can just talk you to death, but questions will make it more fun for all of us. And you can either use the chat box if you want to, or you can ask the questions and just don't feel like you're interrupting, just jump in. So the problem. There's over 385 million orphaned and vulnerable children living in extreme poverty. And when I say extreme poverty, I mean less than $2 a day, less than $1.90 a day, actually, and living kind of on the edge of life. And 70% of that 385 million live in sub-Saharan Africa and India, where ZOE is particularly concentrated. So by almost any measure, it's the greatest humanitarian crisis of our age. Millions and hundreds of millions of children, and the death rate is for under 5 in 2016, it was over 16 million children, or 16,000 children a day died in that situation. So by any measure, it's one of the greatest humanitarian crises. The difficulty is it's hard for people to know how to address it. So we had orphanages, and that was in vogue for many, many years. And it's the only thing people think of. But orphanages are a hard structure for a variety of reasons. And people that run orphanages can really go into that in detail. And then there's foster care, where they're like, well, we need children to be in families, and absolutely that's true. But how to protect children in that situation, and how to find families that are already living in areas of great poverty to have the resources to be able to do that is a huge challenge. And so with ZOE, what we have is we kind of stumbled across this model. So ZOE started as a United Methodist mission in 2004, just doing normal relief work for orphaned and vulnerable children. So feeding programs and medical programs and scholarship programs and all the traditional things. And then in 2006, we had this overage of funding, which was great, but we didn't want to waste it. We wanted to put it on the ground. And so we put out word that we were looking for something truly effective working with orphaned and vulnerable children. And we're introduced to this Rwandan social worker named Epiphany Mujuamana. And Epiphany's got this great story. She was raised as a vulnerable child. At the age of 9, her father passed away. Her mother was disabled. She started growing onions and selling them on the side of the road. And then with the proceeds of that, she started several other businesses. And she was able not only to help feed her family, but to put herself through school. And then the 1994 genocide hit her country. And on the other side of that, she decided to dedicate her life to the thousands and thousands of orphan children left in the wake of that catastrophic event for her country. So she went to work where the resources were for these large Western aid organizations, and she worked for each for several years and became disillusioned with the work. And this is what she said. She said, I'd watch as these generous people would come to my country, and they would give things to my people that my people desperately needed. And then I watched as these children became so dependent on this outside aid that they forgot how to do anything for themselves. And then when the aid disappeared, and it always eventually disappeared, these children whom I had poured my life into were worse off than they had started because they were dependent on this aid that then went away. So she and a team of other Rwandan social workers on a shoestring budget, working directly with these orphan children themselves in their own homes, in their own villages, and working with the communities themselves, designed this 3-year community-based, indigenous-led empowerment program. And that formed the heart. There's iterative changes every year. It keeps improving. The young people themselves drive almost all of that improvement. But the basic philosophy is exactly the same as when Epiphany started it, and that's to take care of the physical, the psychological, social, and spiritual needs of these children in a comprehensive way in the context of a loving, supportive community so that they're able to permanently move beyond charity. Okay, that was a lot to say. If you're able to drink that in. Let me do this. Instead of just talking about it, because the program is fascinating. And I could talk to you all about the ins and outs and nuances of the program itself. It's very different. There's one staff per 1,000 orphan children, because it's really not a program for them, it's a program with them. So the young people in ZOE's program take the lead in their own journey out of poverty, and the staff are just there to help nudge them on the way. And the community stands behind them as well, but it's the young people who are making all the decisions, and that's what makes it sustainable and empowering. But it's really the results that are the headline. So is it okay with you all if I share my screen? Let's see if we can do this. And yeah, here we go. Let me get this where it's, can y'all see that okay? Let me minimize it and move it over a little. Y'all see it okay? It's not behind the screen or anything. Great. So I want to start with these results because I really think that's the real story. And we're kind of geeks, so we like data. And so I'm gonna subject you to the data. We gather data on all the programs, so we know exactly what's happening. There's 8 areas of intervention with ZOE, because these young people are held in extreme poverty, which means that they've got multiple things holding them down. And most organizations, this is what Epiphany found, were just addressing one thing or another thing, like it was either food or education or medical care. But in fact, there were a multiple things that were holding them in poverty, and they all had to be addressed roughly simultaneously. And so I just want to run through some of this data. This is cross-sectional data, which means that it's taken in one point in time across the program. So the incoming class are kids in the very first year before any interventions are done. The midpoint is second year, and graduate is third year, when they're just getting ready to step outside the program. And you can see, basically red and yellow is bad, and blue and green is good. And so, and blue would be kind of sustainable in that area, and green would be thriving in that area. So they're doing really well. So you see with food security, this is a big problem for all our children. When they come into the program, they're hungry. They all know what it means to sleep hungry, and sometimes in extreme hunger where it's life-threatening. So you can see, do you have enough food that you're satisfied? Almost no one does at all at the beginning of the program, just a little sliver at the top. Year 2, that whole situation changes entirely. And then year 3, you see it begin to stabilize and even get even better. And then if we could draw this out past graduation, what we find is these groups of young people don't disband after year 3. They continue working together, and their situation continues to improve. I won't spend so long on each one. Secure housing, also a big deal for safety. I have adequate housing. You see the same situation, starts off really in difficult situation, and it improves dramatically. Health and hygiene. This particular question, we have multiple questions. This particular one is access to healthcare, because that's a big deal. We also teach hygiene so they're not getting sick in the first place. But you see the same pattern kind of playing out. Child rights. Everything bad you hear about happening to children happens to these children. Trafficking, forced labor, starvation, disease, not being able to attend school because they can't afford clothing, or the small fees that are charged. All those things happen to these young people. So knowing their rights and how to enforce them is critical. And we hit that early on. So by the second year, you can see we've pretty much, they're there. They know how to enforce their rights. And so we jump on that fast in the program. Education, either formal education or vocational training. If formal education is no longer a possibility, is what we focus on. But here's, can you pay the expenses for the school-age children? All these young people want to go to school. It's a problem of resources. So we measure how many resources do you have, and you see how much it improves. Income generation. This is the most visible part of the program, the businesses, because they're tangible and you can kind of measure them. Usually these young people have multiple diversified businesses by graduation, where each child-headed household, because that's what we have in ZOE, these child-headed households. So you have an empowerment group of 60 to 100 young people. And that's like the group that you all support in Kenya. You all have 104 young people in Kenya that are orphaned and vulnerable children. And that's made out of 30 child-headed households. So usually we have between 20 and 30 child-headed households per group. Each household is run by an eldest child who's at least 12 years of age. In Kenya, we like to keep it at 14 because 12 is a bit young. But the eldest child is at least 12 years of age on up to 20 years old. And then they have their younger siblings. So we spend a lot of time focused on the eldest child, but also making sure the training gets to all the younger kids, either directly or through the eldest child. So income generation, you see how they improve on income generation. They've got group projects that the whole group does. They have their individual family businesses, and then they have the diversification. And during this pandemic, we saw the power of how they had the business knowledge to be able to pivot their businesses to take advantage of what the needs were and the changing needs in the community. All right, community connections. And cheer up, we're almost done. We only have three more to go. So this one might not seem like a big deal, but when we talk to the young people about what were your challenges before ZOE, what they say first is, I was hungry. And that's always the first thing. But the second thing is there was no one to visit me. I felt shame in my community. Nobody would look at me. No one would speak to me. And so this community connections is actually, when they say their own felt needs, this was number 2 on the list for most of these young people on entering the program. So being able to attend a community event isn't just a nice side thing. It's a big deal for these young people to be part of the community. And then spiritual strength. And I love this question. We've got multiple questions. ZOE is a religiously non-restrictive program. All children are invited to participate absolutely equally, regardless of their beliefs. But we're also a Christian program. And so ZOE staff are Christians. They share their faith in words and actions. And here you see the change of the evangelistic kind of portion of it. They share their faith with others. At the beginning, a few did, but not many. And then you see the sea change as the program continues in their ability to share it with others. And then this is the last slide. This is what we call a self-sufficiency index, where it amalgamates all the questions that we ask in each area and kind of gives a score. So again, red is up to 1 is still extremely vulnerable. Then we get into stable around up to 2. And then past 2, we consider them thriving. And so you see how quickly they rise from year 1 to year 2 to year 3 in food security, secure housing, health and hygiene, in all the areas as they go along, which is powerful to me. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Do you have any questions about that piece in general? Let me just pause. Let me see, is there any chat? No. Oh, yes.
Yeah. When our previous minister was here, Walter Cantwell, who was very involved with the ZOE project, I'm leader of one of the women's groups at church. So we have sponsored ZOE, and I sponsor Jacqueline. I don't know if she's still there or not. I haven't done it since Walter left. But so I don't know so much about what's going on with her or anything lately. My circle also did sponsor Fairfield Orphanage in Zimbabwe.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, which is right below Africa University. But we've had a lot of stumbling blocks in the last couple of years that we can't have a name, we can't have a picture, we can't communicate very much anymore with them. So we don't know really what's going on with them. I mean, we just sent it through
right, that's odd, yeah.
Yeah, and stuff. But as far as ZOE is concerned, you know, we haven't done much more since Walter left with them.
Actually, Will, didn't we just sponsor another group? Isn't that what Brandy said the other day?
Yeah.
Yep. You're muted. Yeah. So y'all are starting another group. And the way that ZOE organizes it, and I think this will make sense to you, a lot of organizations like World Vision and Compassion and some orphanages, you'll sponsor individual children. We shy away from that. What we do is we have group partnerships where you can partner a full group or a half group. We're about to start these empowerment pods, which has been a kind of reaction to COVID-19, where we have an even smaller group. But the reason we do it that way is because you can imagine if you're partnering with one child is getting all the support and their sibling is getting nothing. It can be a difficult dynamic. I mean, just picture your own children if that were the situation. And so ZOE focuses on the group, and the group is responsible for everybody. So every part of ZOE kind of focuses on that group dynamic. And that's what you all are partnering with. You're partnering with a whole group. Your last group was 104 children. I don't know specifically how many are in this group. Jane, I don't know if you've gotten a report yet on it. It usually takes about 3 months from when they organize to get the first report. There's a lot of shakeout at the very beginning, so we wait 3 months, and then the name list stays really quite consistent for the next 3 years. So you all are doing a lot, and that's one of the reasons I was so excited to be here to talk to you all, to kind of share with you some of the things you're actually accomplishing in the lives of these young people. And the other nice thing is that after 3 years, these young people should never need charity again. And they should be able to reach out and start helping others. As soon as their lives start to stabilize, we see them sharing their training. We see them adopting other orphans. We see them employing orphaned and vulnerable children. So they actually move from being a problem in the village to being an economic and social solution to the village. And that's the stuff of the kingdom of God. So they're not just, and like with their faith, they're not just converting. They're starting to disciple other people. And that's what you want with your missions, is to have that catalyzing effect where it just starts exploding.
Right. Mac, did you have a question?
I do. Gaston, the slide you showed regarding the socialization of the members,
Right.
is that indicative of their emotional state and the amount of love that they're getting or showing?
Absolutely. So when before ZOE, what we see is these young people, you know, they're orphan children living on the edge of life. So they're begging. They may steal food in order to survive if their siblings are starving. They're sick. They're dirty. Often they're made fun of. People see them as cursed, and they see themselves as cursed. Often the children say, you know, when we ask them about God, they say, I don't know if God exists, but if God does exist, God hates me. And that's kind of mirrored in the community as well. They're kind of, you know, people don't make eye contact because everyone's poor and you've got this person begging. It's kind of like the same in our country. You know, if you have a panhandler, you might move over to another lane so you don't have to sit there and ignore them. I mean, you know, I don't know how you react. You probably get out of your car and pitch a tent for them. But these children have real difficulties in socialization. They don't go to church because they don't have clothes that are right for worship. I mean, just in every little area. What ZOE does is enfolds them in layers of community. So the person who invites them to the ZOE meeting isn't ZOE, it's the village chief. Because we go in and talk to the village officials before we even start. So the village chief is inviting them in. And the community standing behind the group. And then the group comes together and they all have the same story of pain and they share that with each other. They start visiting each other in their homes and caring for one another. And so over the course of the 3 years, we see their esteem build. And then you have all the awful things that have happened to them. Abuses, physical abuse, sexual abuse, trafficking, forced labor, all those pieces on top of hunger and disease, but their psyches begin to rebuild almost immediately in the program.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Nancy, did you have a question too?
Okay, yes, I was just curious about the COVID impact. I know how it has dramatically caused us to make adjustments here in the United States. I'm just wondering how it's impacting the operations of the ZOE project.
Absolutely. I've been so proud of the young people during this period. COVID was like a stress test for empowerment. And what we found was that not only did they start to adjust their own businesses to be able to meet the needs and the new regulations in their community, but immediately the groups in their second and third year began helping the community. Like in Zimbabwe, they started partnering with the local ministries of health to help educate the community on the virus as soon as that word started coming out. They would identify, in Kenya, we had all these kids identify the elderly people in their community that shouldn't go outside of their houses, and they would go out and collect firewood and water and food. Because, you know, if you don't have running water, singing that birthday song, washing your hands, is more painful when you got to carry that stuff in. So they would go and carry the water in for the people that shouldn't be out of doors to make sure that they had what they needed. In India, they made sure that some of the Christian community that is kind of outside of government reach sometimes were actually on the government list to bring food to them when they had the shelter in place where they couldn't actually leave their homes. In every way, we saw these young people, third-year groups would sew masks for first-year groups, so that they could, you know, go outside and do their businesses with the regulations. They just stepped up in a way that these once vulnerable children were now the ones reaching out to help others. The first year groups got walloped. You know, they didn't have the savings in place and all those pieces. They really got walloped, and most of them used their business grant to survive during that time. And so what ZOE was able to do with support from many folks like you all is to give a top-up grant. And so as soon as the shelter-in-place laws began to loosen, we had this top-up grant. The staff met with them and made sure that they had what they needed, and then they went out and restarted their businesses or started new businesses for the new reality.
Good.
And the other thing they did is just one more thing, this is so cool, they had an innovation. So we couldn't meet in these large groups anymore because it was illegal. You couldn't meet in groups more than 10. But the young people wanted to meet because they have so much support with each other. So in Kenya, we had a group that started meeting with 5 households, would send representatives to meet together. So you had a group of 5, and then that group of 5 sent a representative to meet with other representatives from other groups of 5. So the whole group was able to meet together. We started calling these empowerment pods. The kids taught the staff what they were doing. The staff are meeting each week with all the other 6 countries, Zoe's in 7 countries. And so the staff taught the other staff, and they shared it with their programs. And now globally, because of what these kids did in Kenya, we're meeting in empowerment pods. And it's just an example of when the participants are actually leading the journey, they'll come up with innovations that make the ministry stronger. Sorry, Jane, was that?
That's great. Gail Olive has a question.
Actually, it's George, and I'm driving, so I'm not going to look at you. I'm up in Delaware, but you mentioned human trafficking as a factor on at least 2 times now. How do you make contact with kids who are actively involved, and how do you get them out of that environment to become a part of ZOE?
Absolutely. It's an excellent question and a complicated question sometimes. So trafficking covers a lot of pieces, and ZOE has a number of examples of trafficking. In India, we have some of the traditional trafficking where you would have girls and some boys in kind of that have been sold into a sex trade industry. In that situation, our staff are on the ground. In India, we're mainly in urban slums. And our staff, one of our staff members in Chennai, India, Jabez, spent 7 years gaining the trust of the communities in the slum and some of the gang leaders in the slum. They're a little different gangs than we have in the US. But he got the trust of the leaders, and the leaders would make him aware of the situation, and he would bring pressure to bear on the situation to be able to extricate the girls. Sometimes that meant going into a room and, physically standing in the middle of it. Sometimes it meant kind of bringing authorities in or just shining light on it so that it wasn't in the dark anymore. So in India, probably about 10 to 20% of our girls have been in that situation. In Africa, there is some of that, but less of it. What we have in Africa is forced labor. So someone will be working as a house girl, which means kind of cleaning and providing maid services. But obviously they're in a very vulnerable position there and they have no voice and they don't know what their rights are. And so we get a lot of pregnancies, we get a lot of abuses that are never reported. And then even with some relatives, in a lot of places with extreme poverty, and this is worldwide, and I'm not quite sure, I mean, it goes back to all the Disney stories about the wicked stepmother. You have someone will go, they'll lose their mother and they'll move in with an aunt, or their father will remarry, and they'll be allowed to live in the home, but as a second-class citizen where they don't actually get food, they just get the roof over their head. And in exchange for that, they have to kind of live as sort of a servant in the house, doing work in exchange for the goods. So there's a wide spectrum of trafficking. And what ZOE does is it brings them into this community. It allows them to start their own businesses so that if they want to be part of their biological families or other families with adults, they can do that, but they do it with agency. They know what their rights are. They know how to enforce them. They have their own income. They can stand on their own if they need to. So they can enter into relationships with adults that they crave, but only if it's healthy for them. And if it's not healthy for them, it's not their only option. Sorry, that was a long answer to a perfectly reasonable short question, but that's one of the pieces.
That's good to
JT.
know. I'm curious as, oh, excuse me, JT, go ahead.
So I noticed, can y'all hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Glad I'm back. So I noticed one of the largest gaps in the bar graph was the income generation. And you've talked a lot about them the children starting their own businesses. I'm just wondering what kind of guidance they receive along the way. Is that mainly guidance from third years to the first years, or is there partnerships with local businesses, or just a mixture?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the most exciting parts of the program. It really is fun to watch them take off. So remember, ZOE's modus operandi is not to do anything for these young people that they could otherwise do for themselves. So if we go in and say, hey, here's the 5 businesses you can do, one, they might not be good at one of those 5 businesses. I mean, if someone had me doing engineering, that would be unsafe for all of us. I would be horrible at it. I mean, we all have our own gifts and skills. And the other piece is that if the young people feel like they've done it on their own with some support from behind, then they're able to redo it. So when COVID hit, the reason we had such success is because the young people had already pulled themselves up. So COVID-19 was just another challenge instead of a debilitating hurdle. So here's what ZOE does. In the first year, these kids are in rough shape. I mean, it's hard for them even to make eye contact. They're below any micro lending program you've heard of because they would never be loaned to. They'd have no capital to repay. They wouldn't even take a loan. So in the first year, what ZOE does is it gives them some basic training. ZOE staff can do all the training, but they try to get local government officials or local people in the community to do basic business training because it's another local tie. And we're trying to back ourselves out of their lives as soon as possible. And so it brings in the community into that situation. And then our staff kind of teach around the edges to make sure it's all covered. So what ZOE will do is in basic business training, each family comes up with a business proposal. ZOE gives a micro grant to the group. We actually give a big lump sum money to the group. They have a treasurer, they open up a bank account, which is a big deal for the kids. And then each child-headed household comes up with a business proposal. But they don't bring the business proposal to ZOE, they bring the business proposal to their group. And their group hears the proposal and gives them constructive feedback and then approves the grant, and they go off and do their business. Simultaneously, there's several group income generating projects, and they're usually agriculturally based in rural areas because that's something everyone can participate in. In the urban slums, they might make jewelry because that's something everyone can do. And so if a business fails, and a lot of the businesses fail in the first year because they're just getting their feet under them, the income from the group project kind of gets them through. But the people that succeed and the people that fail share their stories with each other, and they start learning how business works. Like if there's a 14-year-old boy that buys 5 chicks, fattens them up and sells them as full-grown chickens, that's his business. But you have a 14-year-old boy who hasn't eaten in 3 days because we're not giving out food because it's an empowerment program. And he's got 5 chickens sitting next to him. It's not inconceivable he might eat a chicken, right? And once you eat 1 chicken, well, the rest, I mean, they're like Pringles. You can't stop with just one. He might eat all his chickens. And so his business fails. But another, say, a 16-year-old girl in his group makes soap, and she sells the soap at the local market. And soap is hard to eat. So she sells her soap and she's successful. And they both share their stories with the group, and the group begins to understand the discipline it takes to make the business work. And then the second and third year, it's a whole different situation. Instead of micro grants, ZOE gives the group a micro loan. Now the loan's never paid back to ZOE. It stays with the group in perpetuity. ZOE gives them the lump sum. They put it in their bank account. Each family they meet together and decide what interest rate to charge each other because it's their money and they're the ones controlling it. And then each family comes up with another business proposal, and they bring that proposal back to the group. And this time the group runs them through the ringer because it's their money and they're getting interest on this money. And then they begin to kind of ply their trade. Corollary to all that, sorry, there's a lot of pieces. It's not complicated, but there's a lot of pieces. We also do vocational training. So if someone's been out of school, they were orphaned when they were 5, dropped out of school, they're now 15, they can't go back to school. But we'll offer vocational training, and they can get a hard skill like sewing or welding or carpentry. And then ZOE will give them a startup kit to apply that trade. And between all those pieces, you see it, they start getting very strong economically, and they'll have these diversified businesses. And the ones that have hard skills will start training other orphans in their group. So they begin to share out what they have. And if you've got 6 girls that are doing salons, they'll coordinate as to whether they should locate in the same place so that if someone has a long line at one store, they'll spill over to the other stores, like restaurants sometimes cluster. Or they'll say, oh, let's go in different markets because we think the market can only bear 1 salon in this area. And so we'll spread out. So they coordinate with each other. And sometimes they come together when there's a big job. So you have a lot of economic cooperation and synergy and power in having the group approach. Sorry, JT, long answer. Jane, you had that question.
I was just curious as to, like, say, 3 to 5 years after they graduate, what's the percentage of their success?
So we have systematic data that we're gathering on the current programs. We started that 2 years ago. And what those are randomly selected groups. We have a sample size from each country that has a mature program in it. We take a randomly selected sample size and we extract data from that. We plan to continue to follow those groups past graduation. So we don't have systematic data on graduates yet, but we're working on that. What we do have is a lot of anecdotal evidence, though. The groups continue to stay together for 5, 6, 7, 10 years. We had one church in Texas, Mansfield United Methodist. They partnered with 1,000 young people at a time. So they had 14 groups going. They went over in 2012, and they got the most difficult cases that were willing to share their stories of those 1,000 kids. So these were kids really in rough shape. They thought they might not make it. They allowed them to videotape those conversations. And then they went again 6 years later in 2018. And they had the list of young people. They went back and looked at the videos. They had the list of young people and said, hey, can Epiphany find some of these young people? And she found all 8. And they were able to do before and after videos on all 8. So we could see, it was kind of not a systematic study, but a pretty good spot test of some of the worst cases. And then 6 years later, and they were all doing well. Some were doing extraordinarily well. Some of them were just more like middle class in their village, but they were all thriving and able to kind of share their stories. So it's really, for me, that's the best part of ZOE, is the sustainability.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, just a comment. I was listening. It strikes me as just astounding that in a country in Africa that they would find and experience COVID as empowering, and we in the United States find it debilitating. That just to me was kind of like, wow.
And this is one of the gifts that the orphans have to give us. See, we call this thing a partnership, that you're partnered with a group. But if it's a partnership, it means that we both give and receive something valuable. Because if you're not giving and receiving something valuable, it's something, but it's not a partnership. And so one of the pieces that I don't think ZOE does terribly well, but we're trying to get better at, is what can we receive from these orphan children that we're partnering with? And one of the things we can receive is the faith of the people walking in the wilderness. Because we're residing in the promised land, even if it doesn't feel like it day in and day out. We're residing in the promised land, and in the promised land, people begin to depend on their own strength instead of the strength of God. One thing these orphans can teach us is what it means to depend on God and to share out of our need instead of out of our abundance. And those, I mean, just looking back at your own life, those are the things that really deepen our walk with God in powerful ways. And so I can promise you, if you're ever able to go over, like Jane was, to visit these children, that's one of the gifts that they'll give you, is knowing how to depend upon God.
That's so important. That's the good news.
It's the good news. Yes.
Jane, how many groups does Blaine support right now? I know Walter had his own group, but
Yes, we have 3 now.
we have 3. So that's how many are in a group?
It goes from 60 to 100, but like your group in Kenya had 104. So I'd have to count exactly, but it's pretty close to 300 young people. And the financial part of that, it comes out to less than $8 per child per month. And after 3 years, they should never need charity again. Because one of the fun things about empowerment, it's not only more sustainable and more effective, but it's less expensive, because you're not trying to do everything for them. You're trying to do as little as possible for them while maximizing what they can do for themselves. So all we're trying to do is give them on-ramps. We're not giving them money to give them money. We're giving them resources to start businesses so they can make their own money. I mean, and, you know, it's and in every area, that's what we're doing. We're just giving them the on-ramp to get what they need.
So Gaston, Will Malambry, who is our senior pastor here, he was on with us. He had to leave, and he said to tell you, he chatted, "This has been great. Thank you for your amazing ministry. I'm glad Blaine is part of it." And then JT said the same thing. "Thank you so much. He's got to split for church, and we wanted to thank you for your dedication and expertise in this ministry."
Oh, this is so much fun. I've never had so much fun in a ministry, and I appreciate you all walking with it. And I think this ministry will resonate with the church, especially the more people know about what you're doing, the better it'll get. So if y'all would like to participate in a virtual mission trip, we've got a really fun one. We start in Rwanda, and then we go to Kenya the second day, and then we go to India the third day.
Oh man, that's awesome.
It's really fun. And, you know, we do it on Zoom, so it's not like being in person, but it's the next best thing. And so it's kind of fun. If that appeals to you all, if anyone wants to talk on the side about any of the pieces, you know, we'd love just to tell you more about what you're doing with God in the world. It's pretty amazing. That
would be great. And I'll email you, and we will determine when and where and how to do it. That's
great.
Any other questions before we have to leave? No?
And nothing's off the table. We're not smart enough not to be transparent. So, you know, ask any questions that you have.
That's great. That's great. So how long have you been doing this?
You know, I've been doing it for, I came on the board in 2007, and then I came on staff in 2010. So I've been on staff for 10 years and associated for a dozen.
Wonderful.
It just gets better and better.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Where's your base? Where are you out of?
So Zoe's base is in Garner, North Carolina. Actually, we're now in Raleigh, North Carolina. We're we have offices that a United Methodist Church is letting us use, but we're spread out all over the world. So we have some staff in Minnesota. I'm in Texas. We try to keep our U.S. staff as light, and then we're in 7 countries, 6 in Africa, and also India. And this year, I said this a little earlier, this year we had, as of April 2020, we had over 58,000 children actively enrolled in the 3-year program, with more than that number already graduated.
That's amazing.
So it's really been fun to watch it grow. And the vision is, if we can grow 30% a year for the next 11 years, which is besides 2020, which no one,
We won't count that.
besides 2020, that's been our growth rate. If we can continue that, we'll have over 1 million children enrolled in 11 years, with hundreds of thousands graduated. And the next thing we're trying to do now is we're trying to give the program away to other people. Because if we could convince World Vision or Compassion or some of these folks that are running orphanages to kind of pivot to this way of, then we start making a real dent in that 385 million. And that's what we want to do. We want to give the program away. We'll even help manage it if we can get more people kind of trying this approach for sustainable empowerment.
That's awesome. Well, Gaston, we appreciate you joining us this morning. You have given us more insight into ZOE, and I'm sure we'll be in touch, because I would love to do the virtual trip.
It's great. We're having a ball with it. So y'all do that. It'll be a lot of fun.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you all. Have a blessed day and take care. Stay well.